And first and foremost, Brynnawn da, Shiriki, that's Welsh, or good afternoon, hope everybody's well. Being a Yorkshireman, that's the only Welsh I've got, so don't worry. You might need a translator today, at best of times anyway. Absolute pleasure to be here and to be invited. I've learned so much this morning from colleagues already, and I've made a few links in there, and I think we were just saying to Kevin just before the break, don't think there's anything unique in the UK, so some of the stuff I'm going to go through probably won't be new to you, and similarly, some of the stuff that you've spoken about this morning. But it just gives me a bit of solace to recognise in the UK, it's not just us. So we'll see where this goes. In terms of myself then, this is just a Welsh kind of UK perspective. So I'm going to be talking very specifically around the UK, hopefully sharing a bit of information. My role back in Mid and West Wales Fire and Rescue Service, which is my host organisation, is I'm the Director of Emergency Response, Training and Development as well. And they've given me the Emergency Dispatch as well, so just keep me busy. I also sit on the National Fire Chiefs Council, Training and Education Group. I co-chair that, so that, again, another added insight from listening to yourselves from this morning. And I lead the All Wales Training Managers from a Welsh perspective. So you could say I've got a bit of an interest in training, as everybody around the room has. So let me tell you a little bit about the context in the UK then, because I think there's a lot of similarities between the state and provincial aspects of what you've got here. But just to tell you a little bit about the stats, so we've got 49 fire and rescue services in the UK. And across that, recognising that you'll hear about Keir Starmer in the Home Office, in the government there, but fire, in terms of the fire administration, is a devolved matter. And what does that mean? Well, it means that it's the Welsh government that looks after fire. It's also the Scottish government and the Northern Ireland government. So we have devolved matters. We don't come under the Home Office, we don't come under Keir, if you like, we come under our own ministerial players in Wales. And because of that, and the reason why I'm mentioning that, we've got quite some divergent themes then. So how we're governed from a fire authority perspective and elected members, local councils, combined authorities, how we're governed is different. So again, that has an impact. We've talked a lot about funding already today, which is no different from us. We're funded slightly differently, but again, it's the public taxpayer that funds us ultimately. And certainly responsibilities are slightly different in the UK as well. And what I mean by that, in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, we have a statutory responsibility. So there's primary legislation for us to do water rescue. That doesn't occur in England. They don't have a statutory responsibility. So already you start to see some of the complications that could arise with cross-border, and also recognising that we have to do it, they don't. And when it comes to the funding, what is it that we do? We tend to look after our statutory functions first and foremost. This is some of our terminology. So in terms of what we do, prevention, protection, response and resilience. So prevention is the community safety education piece that we do in the fire service, home fire safety checks going out there into schools. We look after that within our rescue service. Protection is like the built environment. So doing audits and inspections, some of the stuff that didn't happen in Grenville, in terms of some of the issues that arose there, was a lack of kind of protection arrangements, so that's been strengthened since. You know the response. The resilience piece then is about our role within multi-agency partners, and we heard from the chiefs across in DC, that multi-agency working, that common operational picture, situational awareness. We do quite a lot within what we call our local resilience forums. They are public bodies, health, education. These are all our different partners that come together when a major incident is declared, and we group that into resilience. We've also got an entity called the National Fire Chiefs Council, which is the professional voice of the fire service in the UK. They advise into the government. We've got our own separate Chief Fire Rescue Advisor for Wales. And in and amongst all that, we've got a Joint Emergency Service Interoperability Programme. It doesn't roll off the tongue particularly well, so I'll refer to it as JESIP from now on. In the UK, because we don't do EMS in fire, we've got fire, EMS, which is ambulance, and police, together, Joint Emergency Service. This is an interoperability program which really forces us to train together, to test together, to exercise together as well. So just wanted to set a little bit of the UK context. Some of you might be familiar with that, others less so. And in terms of academies then, so I was asked to talk a little bit about the future of academies in the UK. We used to have a National Fire Service College. We've still got a Fire Service College, but that was sold back in 2012-13 to a private company. And that used to be the National Fire College for the whole of the UK. What happened, I think, once that transaction occurred, people stopped using the college as much as what they had done previously, and we definitely lost something. To the point now that the National Fire Chiefs Council, on a recommendation on the back of Grenville Public Inquiry, said you need to reinstigate the College of Fire. So part of me being here today as well is to understand what's going on here and what's translatable into that College of Fire. We talked about communities, we talked about sharing information, so we talked about pooling budgets. That's something that we're starting to look at from this new entity. But we've got various degrees of academies. We've got Fire and Rescue Service like myself, which has got our own training academy. We've got joint training academies from 4 or 5 different services that are smaller services that put the money in and built this brand new training centre. And then we've got outsourced, like I've just spoken about, where you've got a training provider where some services are so small and their budgets are so tight that they can no longer afford to fund their own training academy. So they outsource that bit. Qualifications, you've got FPA standards, and you've talked about JPRs. We've got Skills for Justice, which is where we derive our accreditation and qualifications. And as I said, I think from a Northern Ireland and Scotland perspective, they've got their own training academies as well. So you can see you've got this kind of tiered national bit, down to local training academies, down to joint training academies as well. I feel this is going to be counselling today, so I thank you up front. So we've heard some of these already. We've heard from the panel literally half an hour ago about some of the drivers and why we should be doing different things in training academies, why we should be looking at immersive learning, how we should be training, how we should be smarter training for our firefighters. These are some of the main drivers for the UK, and again, you've heard exponential kind of learning decrease. So our fire calls now are half what they were 10 years ago. 3% of our fire calls, 3% of our calls are fire. Jet lag's kicking in, apologies. And out of those 3%, not all of them are what we would classify as working jobs, which is the BA cylinder on your back and going in. That's total. Okay. 25% of our activity is road traffic collisions or managing incidents on highways. So, you know when it says fire and rescue, I think really it should be rescue and fire, and arguably the same as yourselves, and we just heard from DC, rescue and anything else that can throw at you. You know, maritime, hazmat. You know, we do large animal rescues because we've got big agricultural areas like Oklahoma. We've got big rural areas, so we actually do large animal rescue because we know if we don't, the farmer's going to end up trying to do it themselves and end up in all kinds of problems. So, you know, in terms of experiences on the decrease, we need to be training more. Learning evolution, we've talked a bit about that today. We're doing some partnership work with a couple of universities around pedagogy and looking at what that teaching practice needs to look like. Turnover staff, retirements of people with lots of experience, new people coming in with less experience. So there's lots of different drivers for us, and I'm not going to go through them all. But one of the key drivers for us in Wales has been that contaminants feature. Because you heard from Simon Miller in terms of flame, and I spoke to one of the colleagues during the break where recognising that in the UK we've been really slow to really accept if we have occupational hazard of cancer associated with the firefighting role. I know probably when I was in training 20 years ago, when I was actually an instructor, I used to put on the notice board the states that have presumptive law in relation to this. And it's only probably 18 months ago, 2 years ago, that the World Health Organization did declare it at that point. So we're a little bit slow in the UK to really understand the correlation there. So big driver for me in terms of why we need to start considering immersive training from a virtual perspective as well. So just a little bit about what's going on in the UK, and I spoke to Kevin as well at the break. Leicester Fire and Rescue Service is certainly leading the way in VR, but there's quite a lot of development of all the R's going on, and digital twins is a really interesting one because we've done some work in and around that down in one of our biggest high-rise in Wales. We've done a digital twin of it for that very reason that you explored there. But I think it's fair to say that the appetite across the whole of the UK in the development of VR, AR, MR and ER depends on who you're talking to. I think we've got a crowd here of early adopters by the sound of it, if not innovators as well. But I think it all depends on the internal appetite of the chiefs and also the skills within the training department. And we've already mentioned today about perhaps that's useful to in-source some of those skills or outsource some of those skills depending on what the requirements are. We mentioned gamification. We've been doing kind of simulated instant command training probably for 15 years, like most of us around the table today have. But mainstreaming it without the head-mounted displays, big rooms, big screens, actions, considerations, talking through. I think somebody talked about start the exercise again and repeat. That reps, it enables us to do that. We've been doing that from our kind of voluntary, what we call our retained duty system, our part-time fire service, and our whole-time career-based firefighters. We do it for both of them. And again, geography-wise, because we cover a large area, like some of the rural services, that's been really easy to take out remote and deliver remotely. We've also been working with a number of if you like, universities in and around immersive room capabilities. It's really interesting what's going on in the UK at the moment around this. Health is by far leading the way. Speaking with Associate Professor Joanne Davis just last week from Swansea University, and they are definitely leading the way in a lot of the applications of immersive rooms. And we've seen DC with a tunnel there, and I really like that. You know, that's the kind of thing that we've just now started to move towards. Creating a better environment, not to take away from the training you're doing, but to add to it as well. We've also looking at immersive rooms for this joint emergency response testing that I've spoken about, multi-agency, and also multi-agency golden incident command. So I don't know how it works over here, but if we have a major incident declaration back in the UK, people are called in, and we have what we call a strategic coordinating group. And myself as a gold commander, even though I'm fire, I might be tasked to take multi-agency gold incident command of that incident. So we're able to use immersive rooms to facilitate a lot of that training. But as I said, and as you've heard already, these have been mainstreamed in health for a number of years, and there is a growing, there's certainly a growing batch of research in and around training outcomes and efficacy of that simulation training that's now starting to propagate, which is great to see. But there is a but, and I think we've heard some of the buts today about fidelity, about cost, but we've also heard, you know, from John, just need to get out and do it, stop the silliness, and I subscribe to that as well, because there's only so much talking that we can actually do. But when we do talk, I think what's really important is that we need to balance up. I think somebody behind me said earlier on, technology has its place, but part of this whole project, training project, is about understanding what place is that, and how is that going to contribute to firefighter effectiveness. Because you need some kind of mixture, but at the moment we're lacking some of this and we're still relying heavily on this. Interesting, that unit at the top, carbonaceous unit, burning pallets with a filtration stack attached to it, and 2 flatbed lorries. I was able to take it to my outlying stations, and it wasn't about accreditation, it wasn't about trying to get them certified, it was about giving them a fire that in their local area, they might not have had a fire for 5 or 6 years, a proper working job. So it's about skill maintenance, it's about providing an immersive environment that they're just not getting the experience out there. So when we talk about immersive, we've got the virtual, as we've already mentioned, but we've also got the normal traditional methods of immersion as well. So I thought it would be important to cover off that. So in terms of future academies then, big lover of Heifetz and Linsky, adaptive leadership. So they like to say, what's the work then? And I think today we've talked about what is the work. How do we, you know, with regards to, gentlemen, so I forgot your name again.
John.
John. And John said, well, how do we make this happen? Okay. what is the work? How do we make things like this happen? Well, first and foremost, I think the work of Future Academy, certainly in the UK, is about investment and putting the people first. I think Michelle mentioned it earlier on about how does this affect your instructors. We're nothing without them, okay? We're still going to need people, without a doubt, okay? They are the most important, valuable resource, but how we're going to further develop them further in terms of, if we always do what we've always done, we're always going to get what we've always got. So we need to change something, we need to agitate that. But what does that even look like? And the evolution of instructor development pathways for me is key. So what are we asking of our instructors now? What are we asking of them in 5 and 10 years' time? And what are we doing to prepare them for that? And how are we educating them and involving their kind of practice? Ironically, we've spoken already about shared resourcing and infrastructure. As I said to Kevin, I think certainly the conversations today, it's about breaking down those silos and recognising some of this is open source. Just come and play and help build some more and we can share. Goes in terms of all infrastructure. Why wouldn't you do that with instructors? You talked about battalion chief exchanges. Why wouldn't you do instructor exchanges? You know, where you have got kind of peaks and troughs attached to certain times of the year, why wouldn't we kind of start loaning out instructors, bringing instructors in? You've got like 850 part-time instructors, you know. So there's opportunities there as well. And capital and revenue. So top right-hand corner, that is the new £50 million, $66 million training centre in Northern Ireland. Brand spanking new, opened up a couple of years ago. Originally, it was going to be the prison service, the police service, and the fire service sharing a kind of emergency service college. Okay, this one here, top left, if you like, that's the one I'm visiting in a couple of months' time, going up to Scotland, Cambuslang. Again, you're talking round about the 50-60 million mark, creating all this infrastructure. And you may recognise, for those of you that have been across to Morton and Marsh, the airfields. So that's Morton and Marsh, that was the National Fire Service College, which is now Fire Service College Capita. And again, fantastic facilities, the ability to do much more. And interestingly, only a few months ago, they opened up their own simulation lab. So that's showing the kind of direction of travel. So I think in terms of the future academies, some of this work is about investment. Okay, can't do anything. I think somebody said time, people, money. Okay, so we need some investment. The other aspect for me then is about quality assurance. How do we know that we're drawing down on the most up-to-date research? I can't wait to start reading Kate's papers even more and looking at my training academy and looking at how are we using that data, that evidence about, you know, the way forward for us, and how do we draw it down better? Do we? Emerging risk is one for me. You mentioned lithium-ion batteries. So as and when new risks start popping up, how are we training to that risk? Spoke earlier on about risk profiles and about risk profiles driving your activity in terms of what equipment you need, what training you do. To what extent does your risk profile at station level, at state level, at national level drive what it is you do? So more around that in terms of the training academy, and then consistency in application. So these are just a couple of themes to start with in terms of the future of academies. When we move that into a kind of technology world, I think the work for future academies as well is to embrace this integration and digital immersive technology much more than we're doing at the moment. And why? Ask yourself, Simon said it, why? Why are we doing it? Well, we're supporting our learners. That's the point, making them more effective. And ultimately, if they're more effective, our communities are safer. That's the biggest driver for us in the UK at the moment. How do we make our communities safer so that we make our firefighters more effective when they respond? We still do prevention, we still do protection, but when the 999 call comes in for us, how do we respond efficiently and effectively? Finishing off a piece of work using AI at the moment, back in my home service, and we're using it to automate kind of assignments and grades. And we're doing a human being sampling strategy on top of that, because we're a little bit, but we're giving it a go. So that's just about to complete, which is why Andreas can come around this time. But I think somebody's already mentioned it today about if we are getting technology to do some of that other stuff, it frees our instructors to do the practical application elements. I think a couple of questions for presentation earlier on about the role of our instructors, I see them more becoming facilitators in terms of the education process and consolidators of that learning. Years ago, I used to be a diving instructor, PADI, American organisation, put another $1 in. It always costs more to do it okay. Going back 20 years ago, they were already into that CD-ROM element. They were already into that remote kind of delivery of diver education. The way they put the diver system of education together is very similar to what we're trying to do now in terms of the technology aspect. So recognising that a lot of this stuff that we're trying to do with our instructors is not about reducing our instructor cadre down, but it's about using them for the practical application. And as our role becomes more diverse, then it's about redeployment to those other areas that we wouldn't normally have done previously in terms of that education piece. Interestingly, again, I did speak to any of the presenters today. The collaboration is massive for me. We need to be collaborating much more with industry leaders in terms of that kind of reality piece. And you know what? I've lost the S. No idea what the S stands for. I knew last night, but I forgot this morning. But part of this, I think, for me, is about the work that you're trying to do here. Create this space where developers in the fire service can speak a common tongue, a common language, and that everybody is getting something mutually beneficial out of. So there is a role for training academies to learn that bit of that language, whether it's through the conformity assessment, whether it's through the rubric, and to start that dialogue going, because we've got the same issue in the UK. We're speaking different languages and we're passing all the time. We've got these great ideas and concepts, but we're not landing it, or we're certainly not embedding some of this technology. I think the other thing that the integration of digital immersive will give us is the self-paced, anytime learning. Somebody talked about today about the test results going up, PGF mentioned it, and we've heard that again. I think if I'm having to learn at the pace of the instructor, or I'm learning at my pace based upon what I can access, then it stands to reason why test results are going to be better. Then my instructors then come in, consolidate that learning, and then look at the practical application. I think you mentioned about SOPs, you know. I remember having an argument with one of my chiefs when I was junior in rank. SOPs are the bread and butter of this service. And I said, no, the practical application of standard operating procedures is the bread and butter. So I think that's where our instructors come in terms of that kind of practical application piece. And I also think, you know, the proportionate reduction in risk. So when we start looking at flame or things like that, so my breathing apparatus course, a couple of weeks long. At this moment in time, we may do 6 to 7 what we call hot wares, carbonaceous wares. If actually I can achieve the same learning outcomes with 3 hot wares, because I'm using technology and simulation for some of them, then I'm reducing the exposure to carcinogens to my people, both instructors and our students. So why wouldn't I try and reduce the risk in some form or other, providing I can maintain the efficacy of that learning outcome? One of the other things I think training academies will need to consider, so Kate's going to love this, is about partnering with academia. It is about enhancing what we call pedagogy. I think we call it pedagogy. I can't say it that way, but pedagogy. So the whole teaching practice. And I think we can only do that with experts in the field in learning education and drawing down that evidence-based approach. So rubric's a great starter. I like it, I love it. I know we've talked about the specificity within it. But that's what the workshops will be about tomorrow. But I do think that that partnership with academia helps us draw down an evidence-based approaches, which ultimately optimise business impact. And the reason why I use business impact, I think John mentioned about measurements, how we measure training. I've always been brought up with the Kirkpatrick model. And you know, you go up through the Kirkpatrick model, eventually you get to business impact, you get to organisational impact. And you know, for me, it's about the impact being better for our communities, for the people that we're serving and people that we're attending from response capability. So it's a difficult piece in there when you look at the impact of the training beyond just the training, when you start looking at into organisational and business impact. I think there's more work that we can be doing with academia to help us with some of those issues. And we've heard it already today, leadership, training academies, leadership. Give it a whirl, as Tide would say in Ireland, who's a colleague of mine in Ireland, and went over there last year to present into their Chiefs Conference, and we talked about our voluntary firefighters, we call now retained firefighters, and the impact we're having on some of the training there. And as we find out what competence really looks like across these different, whether it's hazmat, whether it's compartment fire behaviour, whether it's road traffic collision, as we start to understand the competency requirements, we start to understand the impact we're having on some of that recruitment retention. So I can't wait to see Brittany's presentation on that. But from a leadership perspective, I think, you know, we probably don't give our training academies enough kind of kudos in relation to that. So we know the environment is very volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex and ambiguous at the moment. And this is the time that leaders and leadership and the entity which is leadership, we need to stand that up more. So what does that mean for our training academies? Does that mean that, yes, we need to get on with it, stop the silliness, push into the immersive world much more? Is it about a little bit more culture, less command? Question mark in the UK FRSs at the moment with some of the cultural issues that have come around. But recognising good culture will actually enhance good command, which enhances effectiveness. It's all linked. How linked is it in our current training academies? I'm not 100% sure. I think we've talked about this already, more collaborative approach with other academies. It was really interesting, the conversation with the Aries platform and about that kind of communities. You look at the World Fire Congress, the communities of practice and sharing and joining things up and joining the dots. So there certainly needs to be more of that going on between training academies, if for no other reason to make them more efficient and more effective, but then to share the good practice. I think Jeff mentioned it earlier on when he said about sharing these practices. Where it's exemplar, why won't we cast that message out to every single training academy in the States or in the UK? Because some of the stuff you're doing is amazing. Yes, I can't afford it, but some of the principles I can. So it's how do we share that great practice as this collaborative approach. I mentioned already instructor development pathways, but it was really interesting, I think, from where we all are at the moment, with lots of stuff happening in the world. I think this leadership coming through the training academies is vitally important. That document on the left is a document that Sweden has shared out 5 times with its communities since 1943, I think was the first time that document was sent out to every single household in Sweden. And that document is very much around community resilience and enhancing the community's understanding of what's going on and educating them on what they need to do should something go wrong. But interestingly, Sweden's approach to this as well is it's increasing, it's doubling the size of its firefighting capacity, although it's called emergency responders. So for me, Sweden's a prime example of how they are exhibiting thought leadership, and that then is hitting the training academies and working with the training academies to understand what does that mean for the safety and well-being of the communities in Sweden. So, you know, I do think thought leadership is something I'd love to see more happening in training academies. There's been a lot of it already today, which has been fantastic. And I'll leave you with that maybe the World Fire Congress is the conduit to some of this. I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't attended the World Fire Congress meeting and got to meet a couple of individuals within that meeting and talk through some of this stuff. So maybe that's part of the steps of this, is about really getting behind that from a global perspective. So I'll leave you that quote because we've all got a shelf life, and I think, you know, for me, we need to start making decisions that we might not see the fruition of. Okay, we had a great quote about the bridges. I've also written it down. I love swimming, but I think society grows great when old people plant trees, the shade of which they'll never sit in. Is a great example of how we've got to be looking 10, 15, 20 years into the future, and sometimes making the hard decisions today that will never reap the rewards of. And that for me is future of fire academies in the UK. That's my email if anybody wants to follow up on anything. I will be around later this evening. I'll probably be going to the ale house with all those choices. But yeah, happy to take any questions. Good, that's great. I'll leave it to you.
Greg mentioned about Sweden and the World Fire Congress, and they've been on the World Fire Congress calls. Jim, Egan, and myself have been on. And this is a real urgent issue for them. They're almost doubling their fire service. And the driver was the political uncertainty of the Ukraine. And if there was going to be a bigger upset in the geopolitical world that would impact them and their nation, because they have a close border and whatnot. Training props, and we had a slide deck that showed some of the classic training props we use here in the States. He was particularly interested in how we've made mobile training props, how we've taken the concepts that we would invest in a physical structure and now made it mobile, and how we were taking it out and doing it, because they have to grow their fire service into areas where they have not had a fire service. And they have a lack of resource and a lack of centralized government, some remote areas and whatnot, and they're struggling as to how they're going to deliver some of the training resources. So to Craig's point about getting together to work together, I think it's more critical in the world we're in today than perhaps it's been in previous years.
The other thing that they brought up is that fixed facilities are a target.
Yeah.
And they're concerned about having targets that could disrupt their ability to train their firefighters.
Or make their firefighters casualty while they're training. So very different perspective, very different, so.
I have a question for Craig and related to one else. And we've talked about this, you folks have talked about this, whether, health is farther ahead in simulation and innovation and so on. But is there any sharing or collaboration with the hospitals or local health authorities to support EMS training and health training? I pose a question to you, but then I would be interested to hear from others here.
So, yeah, so in the first instance, just to speak to EMS, as I said right in the beginning, I may have not said it, we're talking about it.
No, I know it's not a full responsibility,
we
but
don't do EMS, unfortunately, at this moment in time. Certain services do elements of, but in terms of the collaboration, yes, we're a small community in Wales. We're quite joined up from that perspective. We've been across to the University of Wales Trinity St David's. They've got their immersive room. We've just recently got in with Swansea University. There's work to be done. But one of the questions I posed to the associate professor there recently about understanding learning outcome and the increasing the efficacy from the simulated training. As I was speaking to Kate earlier on, this is not necessarily about being too prescriptive with the outcomes, but recognising across broad spectrums we are seeing improvements. So yes, there is collaboration going on. There's more work to be done there. Because we are a devolved nation, I think we get better access to government support from that. We're a small, relatively small nation and good kind of relationships with government on that. So yeah, I think that whilst there's more work to be done, collaboration is occurring. But we're similar to yourselves. There's some collaboration going on across fire and rescue. There's a lot of collaboration going on across multi-agency response and local resilience forum training, but there needs to be more, without doubt.
is that something down here? Like, what do the hospitals think? Do they not? I know they don't want to share any funding or anything, but if aren't they a stakeholder in improved EMS training for the people that come in the ER?
Our state does it through ad valorem tax and through career tax. And so many of our career techs, in Oklahoma, you're never more than 100 miles away from a career tech. And we work through them. We develop the programs, we have the mobile units, we have the record keeping, and we have the accreditation. And we partner with them. We do probably half the delivery and they do the other half of the delivery. They have mobile simulators. They also have integrated telecom systems and all that kind of stuff, so they can do everything remotely and have for years. We also have community paramedic through OSU at a higher ed level. So we have career techs for basic, they do all kinds of anything from automotive shop, EMS. A lot of them now have fire programs. Those that don't want to go after a 4-year degree. And then we have higher ed. And higher ed has like a community paramedic through our medical program, so you can go from being basically an EMT all the way up to a full-fledged doctor through higher ed and these other little satellite programs. And so we share that technology, and we have a sim lab, OU has a sim lab
For health, for EMS.
for health and for EMS. And then they have smaller simulators, mobile simulators and sim labs throughout the state as well. And
Looking at hospitals that provide medical direction and coordination,
Yeah.
like sponsor hospitals for paramedic programs, stuff like that, is
Yeah, same here.
an easy way.
Yeah.
Ed?
I was going to ask, did the Grenfell Tower fire have any impact on this overall training picture in the UK?
Absolutely, yeah. So, suite of recommendations coming out of Grenfell Tower. Some are directed at fire services, some directed at regulators, some, everything else. But one of the recommendations, which still hasn't been acted on yet, because we're trying to figure it out, is what does a College of Fire look like? Because we've got a National College of Policing, and in England, some of the governance arrangements suggest that it's more aligned to police and crime commissioners and fire commissioners. So whether it's going to look something like the College of Policing, is it going to be an entity? Suggestions, it might not actually be a built entity. It might be a centre of excellence without actually having a centre. The centre may be the content and the delivery and everything else. So that's not been answered yet, but certainly some of the other recommendations around stay put advice, evacuation, firefighting techniques. So in the UK, when we establish a high-rise bridgehead, then you go under air from that point. I know in the States you can go under air and things like that. We're starting to look at some of those areas now. So yeah, a lot of learning from Grenfell. I would say a chunk of it's already been put in play, and some of that would have played through with what we need to be doing in the future.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Craig.
Thanks, Jess.
And Brittany?